Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our viewers everywhere. You're welcome to another episode of Cinnamon&Fire, where we bring you real stories from bold builders in the African diaspora or in Africa that are making blazing trails in the spaces that they operate in. And I am your host, DK Emmanuel Jr. Merimoth, and it is a pleasure today to be having with us Moses Amama. Did I pronounce that well?
Yeah, you did.
I did. Okay, Moses Amama. I think I'll start with you. Giving you the floor to just introduce yourself. Give us a basic rundown of what it is that you do.
Okay. Uh, Thank you very much. It's exciting to be here. My name is Moses Amama. I'm a senior product designer with Hudbot. Hudbot is a software design and development consultancy in Europe, US, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Aside my role as a senior product designer, I also lead two separate initiatives, more like three, but two main initiatives. One is FutureFeat, which is a maker space focused on just giving the next generation of African creators a space to learn and to explore and just majorly to get exposed to technology, to design, to entrepreneurship, and to media. And the second is Startup Lab, where we are currently focused on giving entrepreneurs and founders, especially in budding ecosystems like the one I'm in Jos, a chance to sort of like come into a structured space and a structured program to build their products. Our goal is majorly to get these founders from like idea to MVP in the best way possible, generally. I also run a mentorship program called Learning with Mo. And with the mentorship program, my focus is just to sort of like get folks who are just starting their design career, just sort of like catalyze their journey, if I may use that word, to a place where they are comfortable now, like applying to jobs or getting those jobs and sort of like running with it.
Wow. That's quite a lot of things. I think the first thing I would start with, how do you juggle so many different hats? I know when you think of design, it's something that has to be very detail oriented. It's something that you have to pay attention to specifics, right? So
yeah.
Designing a product and working on mentorship and like doing your own things, how do you juggle all these things at the same time?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I think for me personally, I look at experiences as being a product of design also, right? So I have sort of like looked at all those different responsibilities and all those different focus from a designer's perspective. So with FutureFeat is majorly about designing learning experiences for kids, right? With Startup Lab is majorly about like designing a structured approach for founders to be able to move quite effectively to getting their MVP and going to the market. With the mentorship program is also about designing like learning experiences, but this time around we're looking at sort of like helping folks design their career in a proper way. So yeah, I've sort of like applied that same level of detail from my day-to-day work. Try out something, iterate on it. If it doesn't work the way I expect it to work, to iterate on it. If it works the way I want it to work, figure out a system, like a way to sort of like systematize it to make sure it's able to run effectively even without me. So generally I've looked at everything from the perspective of design. So it has allowed me to pay like that attention to detail to everything else. Secondly, I also have been able to gather around myself a very amazing team of people that are able to help me sort of like work efficiently in those different spaces. So my work then tends to like setting direction, setting strategy, and designing a system that allows them to also do their best work generally. So at the top of the food chain of everything, I've just been there as a designer solely, sort of like creating that system and that structure for all those things to move and to flow effectively.
Wow. So on behalf of everybody that you're mentoring, I want to say a big thank you, because I find that mentorship is something that could be tasking in itself, because you have different individuals that have different perspectives and they are always trying to figure things out. And I've taught in little ways here and there, and I know how tasking it could be. So thank you for actually dedicating your time to better the people that are coming and giving them a space. And then another thing is that not too many people that are experts in their field really care. Not, let me not use the word care. Let me just say might not have the time or whatever, different reasons, right? But very few people actually want to show people the way as well. So on behalf of everyone that you're teaching, I want to say thank you. So we can dive into design, right? And you say it's not just interface, right? It's also, according to you, you said you say it's experiences waiting to be discovered, right? So how did you come up about that perspective? Was there any early projects that you worked on that shaped that for you? And how does that influence how you still approach your work process now?
Okay. I got into design from a development perspective generally. So I came in as a front-end developer, working within teams trying to build softwares. At the time that I did not know that there was a career at all called like user experience design or product design. But one of the things that kept on sort of like coming to me, like coming to the top of my mind, is the way that people tend to use the products that we're building, and generally how it makes them feel. Does it make their day easier or does it frustrate them, right? People use your product because they want to achieve a purpose, or maybe they want to solve a problem. It could be maybe placing an order for a product, booking a resort somewhere for the folks who travel, booking a flight and all that. And if they are able to achieve that goal or not, affects a lot on how they feel and generally impacts their day. And I saw that firsthand in most of the products we're designing, we're building at the time, which were majorly educational products. And I remember thinking to myself constantly, how can we make this better? And that was exactly that was a question, if I may say, that drove me into exploring user experience design as a career that has sort of like led me to where I am today. And so me diving into user experience was majorly trying to answer that question. How can we make people enjoy using the products that we build? And one of the things that solidified that philosophy for me, if I may describe it as such, is finishing from my design nano degree at the time, and the first organization that I get to work with is a non-profit, a mental health non-profit, where I have said I want to impact the experiences of people using my products or the products I've designed. Now I'm in a field where the experience of people using the products I design has very huge ramifications, right? Because this time around, we are not just looking at somebody trying to order a shoe online and not succeeding, or their payment failing and they are sort of unhappy and request for a refund. Now we're looking at experiences that can potentially make someone's life easier or harm them. especially in the mental health space. So that sort of like solidified that philosophy for me even more about making sure that the people who use the products that I design have sort of like a great, not just a great this time around, but also a safe experience. I'll give you an instance. There was a time we worked on, we're working on a product, and we had this very interesting concept on the splash screen that I thought was super beautiful and super exciting. And just for us to go to testing, and we realized those patterns we have used will actually be a disaster for somebody with sort of like a dissociative syndrome, right? And at the time, regardless of how beautiful and amazing we thought that screen was from a design perspective, we had to shut it down without thinking twice and adopted something that as designers will consider boring. But it worked, it was functional, and it is safe, right? So those are some of the things generally that some of the things I experienced early in my career transitioning into design that helped me arrive at that conviction of trying to make people have great experiences when they use the products that I work on.
Wow. So you have worked across so many different sectors. I see health. You mentioned health as well. I see education. I see real estate. So I see there was something else. I said nonprofit, tech. So how have working across these different sectors helped shape your thinking as a designer and as a leader?
So working across those various sectors is actually one of my favorite things about being a designer, because in many cases I come into those sectors not being a domain expert, right? But at the end of the project, or at the end of sort of like working in that industry, I could probably give at least a 1-hour lecture on like the concepts in that industry. One of it being like I spoke about like the mental health sector initially. At the time I was done with the mental health sector, I think when I'm speaking with people sometimes about the topic, I've had folks sort of like ask me if I'm a psychologist or if I've studied any health related. I'm like, no, I have a degree in statistics and computer science. It's just that I worked in this domain for a while. And so generally, what it helps me do is to just broaden my knowledge and understand the domain, because that's the only way I'm able to solve the problems for the users in that industry. A good example that comes to mind is, and okay, before I even speak about that example, one of the things that typically happen is that, or one of the things that comes to mind is how I deal with potentially different kind of users in each of these different industries. And I don't just deal with different kinds of users, I also deal with them in like different domains, right? So you have users in the health sort of like domain whose main goal is to be able to assess treatment or assess help. Then I've also done a lot of work in the fast food chain with a 40-year-old fast food company in Saudi Arabia. At that point, you're also designing for users who are potentially very hungry, you know. And then I've also designed for like the edtech sector, where it's more about like improving learning, and there you're dealing with like longer outcomes. For each of these domains, it's entirely like the way I approach thinking about those products are entirely different.
Right.
The urgency of decisions, how clear decisions need to be, how simple decisions need to be. For instance, you don't leave a lot of room for error when you're designing. Yeah, literally, because you're dealing with people's lives generally there.
Right.
For where you're dealing with a customer that is very hungry, you want to also put a lot of controls that stop them from making a lot of mistakes.
Right.
Because hunger makes a lot of people place orders to the wrong delivery location that end up costing the company a lot of money.
Right.
Like giving you like frustrated customers that end up impacting the business because they are going to give you a bad rating continuously, because they wouldn't literally care if they were the ones that made the mistake and all that. So what that has taught me is to be adaptable and to be able to take the time to understand my users in their context and in their environment, right? And translating that to leadership, I think that has made me a very good people person also, because even in the way I deal with the people who work with me, I tend to try to meet them in their context, in their environment. So the way I get the best out of one person may not necessarily be the way I get the best out of the other person. Right. Yeah. So generally, these are some tiny bits of things that I've noticed I've been able to pick up from like working in different across different industries and dealing with different sets of people.
So I can guess that when you're working across these different sectors, they are different. Obviously, different companies or different products have different maybe budgets, have different goals. I'm guessing that you have across your journey worked with people who maybe had all the resources that they needed, and then worked with some who were maybe building and resources were coming in as the project developed, right? So how do you balance the push for perfection? Because I know how people are. Even if they give you the minimum resources, they still expect the goal that they have in their head to be achieved, right? So so how do you balance having all the resources or not having most of the resources, and then dealing with people's deadlines and budgets, and still trying to achieve the concept that they have, and then still sticking to your standard and your work process and the perfection, your standard that you want?
Yeah. So generally, one thing I've found across different, and you're right, I've literally worked with a non-profit that works with a very tight budget, and I've worked on products that sort of literally give us a budget ranging across millions of dollars, majorly. But one thing I've also, as a consultant, one thing I've seen that is constant across most of those projects is they often want to get the most value in the shortest period of time. And one of the things I struggle with a lot as a consultant is most times when founders come to us with like projects, they often have a reference or maybe some hotshot product in the industry,
right,
that they want to be better than,
or better, yes.
in most cases. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this is a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, 10-year-old product, and it's been worked on for that long and has been refined and iterated upon for that long. You probably have a very high budget, and you probably have given me 3 months, and we're probably maybe just one designer or two designers on the project. We will not be able to get you that far or to like beat that quality while doing everything that is in that product within this period of time, because it takes a long time to iterate and to like introduce some of those features. Now, but that's where communication and stakeholder management comes in, like becomes really important, because you have to then be able to communicate that, all right, this is where we want to get to. we want to be better than XYZ company, right? But this is where we can start from today, literally. So the best approach to building this kind of products is building lean at first, especially coming up with an MVP, building lean to come up with an MVP, and then incrementally add value and make it better. Now, from a designer's perspective, one of the first ways I approach that kind of problem is to run a sprint, a product design sprint, where I sit with the stakeholders and we are able to sort of like come up with the core problem that needs to be solved, come up with a long-term goal, and then define priorities where we decide that, okay, these are all the things we want to do, but these are the most critical part of this product, right? So this is the part, this is the value we want to offer to our users. So maybe let's build this part first and then incrementally start adding the other parts. And that helps me manage budget and timeline and scope and expectations, because when we cut down to the critical thing that needs to be solved and we're able to solve it, and I'm like, okay, the budget we have covers for 2 weeks or for 3 weeks. This is what we can solve in 3 weeks. And we set that expectation, right? For the projects, for the products that don't have a lot of budget to work with at first, solving that creates value for the customers. And if it's what the product or what the company needs to go to the market to start earning revenue, then they are able to go to the market in 3 weeks and start earning revenue, right? Earning revenue then allows them to keep building and keep improving the product and keep adding value, getting it to where they want to get to, okay? But when I'm typically dealing with companies that have maybe more budgets to deal with, once we've identified that core part of the product we need to build and say we are able to build it in 3 weeks, they are like, okay, so let's put this maybe to a beta testing to start getting like feedback from very early customers, right? But we have the budget, so you don't need to wait for the beta testing and we go to the market for revenue to come in. We can potentially continue building like another critical part of the product that is maybe a little less important than the first one we focused on. So we then start incrementally adding that while getting feedback on the first part and iterating. And that allows us to continue building incrementally. But my advice to founders and to companies in most cases is, once we get to a point where we can offer the user some certain amount of value, we should launch, we should go to the market, we should put the product in front of customers, right? And buy ourselves time to keep building. And that approach has worked generally. It has helped me to be able to adapt to working on products and with stakeholders and companies that have different budgets, because I'm able to adapt it like across board generally. You're muted.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. So when we started the conversation, you mentioned the US, I believe, like with the current company that you're working with, you mentioned the US, I think you mentioned Europe, I think you mentioned Africa as well. And yeah, obviously when you're working on these projects, there are project managers, there are teams, so cutting across these different regions, obviously collaboration is very important. That's what helps you properly understand the vision and what they are trying to achieve, right? So what are some of the challenges you have faced working with different people in different regions, and how have you learned to navigate those challenges?
I think it may not sound like such a big deal, but the most challenge I've seen is with time zones. So Yeah, sometimes I've worked with folks folks that are like 8 hours ahead of me. Sometimes I've worked with folks who start like 2 hours ahead of me. My current project, when I start work by 9, it's like 11 a.m. for them. So by 2 p.m., my time is already 4 p.m. for them, end of their day, and they are leaving the office, right? So it creates a bit more of a situation where every collaboration needs to happen within a very tight window. Um, so sometimes what that means for me is I may have to start work early. Um, Sometimes, if depending on the time zone, I may have to sort of like adjust my timing a little bit to pair with somebody late into my evenings. But many times the structure is the same. I work on my time zone and then we collaborate within the overlapping period generally. So yeah, but aside from time zone, um, this is not so much of a challenge as it is an advantage, right? And that is because we're such a distributed team. We all come with different contexts and like different cultural understanding. I don't think this is even a problem at all. Um, I guess the only time it becomes a problem is when we don't get to understand or pay attention to our context very early, and all. But I think in most of the teams I've worked on, especially my current team, the fact that everybody's able to bring their different cultural understanding and context always sort of like improves our what we come up with at the end of the day, right? Because for instance, if we're dealing with, let's say, authentication, uh, let me just use that as an example. How people would sort of like create an account on, let's say, a mobile app we're building in maybe a country like Bahrain, right? And I'm thinking, oh, it's probably just going to be, we probably don't need to capture this country and this country. And then you hear somebody citing, oh, I was in this country one time and I tried to create an account and my country was not captured. And then you then realize that, oh, there's a situation where people are traveling through different places and they may need to set up an account. So you probably are not just looking to give room for only people with Bahraini phone numbers, for instance. You have to be able to capture people from like all around the world because people travel. Sometimes people are visiting and they still maintain their local numbers from the countries they are in. So those kind of perspectives like improves the quality of the product we are building generally in most cases that I've seen. But in cases where the folks on the team don't maybe there's a misunderstanding or something, or let me give you one example. So okay, I don't want to use a very direct example, but in a situation whereby there is a word that maybe you're used to in a place like Nigeria, and it's very harmless and very safe to use, right? And that same word is problematic elsewhere.
Right.
Right? So those kind of things, when they come up, it tends to make like the team dynamic a little bit interesting. And it's also the reason why in my team, when you want to use any term that is very local to you, you try to give context upfront.
Right.
Like, oh, this is what it means for us. And probably try to ask, does it mean any other thing elsewhere? I've designed an app before with an English word that needs to be translated to Arabic, right? And I remember just going to Google Translate or some AI tool and translating it directly. And the stakeholders, the moment they saw the word, they sort of like flipped. Like, oh, this is a bad word. This is a bad word. So those kind of like tits and bits of things are some of the challenges that come generally. You're muted again.
So yes, to the people that are watching, if you don't go anywhere, stay with us. You're welcome. If you're just joining, welcome to Cinnamon and Fire. If you've been with us, we thank you for keeping in touch. I don't think there are a lot of platforms like this where it's a conversational, but yet insightful and a learning process where we peek into some of the brightest minds in Africa and Nigeria and in the diaspora. So please do us a favor, comment, like, subscribe, and continue to follow us. And as we uncover and discover many more bright minds that Africa has produced, today Moses Amama is with us, and he has been sharing with us some of his expertise and experiences as he has transitioned from a hands-on designer, now a mentor and a leader. And it has been a pleasure hearing and learning from him so far. So I think my next question would be, obviously, when it comes to mentorship, people that you're leading, I feel as a leader, one of the major things that you're looking for is excellence in whoever it is that you are mentoring, right? So what that also means is that they are at some point going to maybe challenge certain things that you say, maybe ask a lot of questions, So I think my next question is, as you empower people, how do you manage their, let me just say, characters? How do you manage different people's characters, and how do you create space to allow them to shine and thrive, right?
Okay, so for me, I think one of the first ways I try to manage people's character is deciding who I hire or who I bring into the team in the first place. And I default to people who have a profile of being mission driven. I try to look for people that are mission driven generally, because I tend to look for people that can take initiative, that can think on their feet, and can be dedicated to like a mission generally. And now in most cases, when they come on board on the team, one of the things I try to do, because I've already set that foundation of looking for people that are mission driven, is then to give them a mission and to give them a goal to pursue, right? So yeah, I share my goal with them, and I give them my expectation, and give them clear-cut deliverables and outcomes that I'm looking out for. And I leave the how essentially to them. And I guess one of the only other things I try to sort of like guide them towards is communication and collaboration, to communicate what I need to know early, to communicate a blocker they are having early, or to communicate a frustration that they are having early, so that I can know when to step in and how to unblock them better. But largely, just being able to hire really mission-driven people and giving them something to pursue has worked really, really well for me. There are instances where I have sort of like noticed some people on the team sort of like slacking or not living up to, I guess, the expectations that the both of us have set for the role, right, and for each other. And in most cases, the first thing I try to look for is, first of all, what is happening in terms of do they have the best environment, or am I creating the best environment and best conditions for them to do their best work, right? That's the first thing I try to look out for. And in some of those cases, it's just that life has gotten overwhelming lately, or they have something they're dealing with. So I've also defaulted to hiring people that are super early career. And what that means is hiring final year students who are about to write their final exams, or hiring final year students who just finished their final exams, or people who are serving, or people who just finished serving. I think in my team, I just have like 2 or 3 people that are not really early career generally. So you know that with those early career folks, there is a lot of mentorship on the job skills and soft skills. They know the technical part amazingly, right? But you also need to do a bit of mentoring on like communication, collaboration generally. And in some of those instances, when I have conversations with people, I realize it's just something probably outside of work that is sort of like stressing them, if I may use that word. I recently had a situation where someone who was super effective was not delivering on their tasks for like a week, and it turns out internet went really bad in their area of residence within a short period of time. Power also went really bad, and the stress of having to navigate, looking for where to charge, coming back to terrible internet, and all those things. So it then becomes, okay, you're meant to come to the office like once or twice a week because it's hybrid. Can you maybe like come into the office within this specific day and just sort of like run through your tasks? So we work with them to try to figure out some better condition that we believe can enable them to do their best work. For some people, it's just motivation. You probably need to sort of like speak to their, what do you call it now? Just speak to them and clarify the mission again in their mind. I think we had a problem once where for like a month, our deliverables were just flat. We were not being effective as a team. And I remembered I used like 2 weeks, like 2 whole weeks, just sitting down, creating processes, documenting processes, so that if the team have a question to ask, they don't have to come to me. They just go to that handbook and see like documented process. And that worked really, really well in that instance for us. But what that also showed me is there are some people who you hire and they just don't fit into the mission. They are not a culture fit, basically. And in that instance, I have no choice but to let them go. But generally, I've come to realize that as a founder, the first people I need to sell to are not even my customers or the users I'm building for. It is the team that I've hired. They are the first people I need to sell to. They need to believe in the mission because they are the ones who do the work that ends up serving the customers. And so far, that has been working really well.
Very, very, very cool. One thing that I noticed immediately that you turned your camera on is your background, and I see books, I see graphic design for everyone, I see motion by design, and that automatically tells me that you're somebody that is probably dedicated to learning and upgrading your skills, right? So with how developments move really fast in the tech industry, how do you and your team keep learning and adapting to the new trends and expectations without maybe getting tired or getting exhausted? You know, how do you guys keep up to speed with what's going on in the industry?
Okay, so as a senior product designer, I'm super lucky to work with an organization that champions continuous improvement. For instance, we work Mondays to Thursdays on projects, and Fridays are dedicated learning days for me. right? So that allows me to sort of like invest my time and plan for learning across board. Sometimes I use it to write articles, sometimes I use it to read books. And those are also the days that I sometimes use to mentor like other designers, because I learn from teaching, basically. I come from a background of legacy teachers. My dad was a principal for like 23 years. And before he became a principal, he was a teacher for like a couple of years before that. And he switched from an accounting background. My mom has also been a teacher. So I've sort of like always been a teacher at heart. And so most times I always try to find an opportunity to teach, because I learn a lot from just teaching. So if a mentee comes to me with a question today about, let's say, design systems or setting up a design system, and we have a call in a week or in 2 days or in 3 days, and I feel like, oh, maybe I have knowledge gaps here, I have to learn before I get on that call generally. So that also helps me keep pace. And that's how I sort of like keep myself learning and improving. And for my team, one of the ways I always try to encourage them or to make sure that they are also improving is, first of all, to challenge them, to always set the bar. So most times I look at their level, and if it's here, I try to set the bar here and give them a lot of freedom and a lot of confidence and encouragement to try to meet up to that bar, right? So, for instance, our IoT facilitator, there was one time we're trying to teach the kids some activity that has to do with building like a facial recognition system, like a physical device, that a prototype for like a doorbell or a security cam that sort of like scans people's face and grants them entry or not. And it's more like, oh, I've not done this before. Like the whole, I don't know, I've not done this before. How do we do this component? And there were a lot of, she was mentioning a whole lot of challenges and all that. And I remember just telling her, yes, like this is FutureFeat in full is actually FutureFeat Innovation Lab. So I was like, one of our philosophies is creating the space to try new things. Even if we fail at it, like we incrementally try to get better. And we cannot encourage that philosophy in the kids if we're not encouraging it, or if we're not trying our best to also follow that route, right? So those are all the situations I sort of like try to create for them in most cases, to just put them in that situation where they have to try to learn more and more, and not just sit and be super comfortable with what they know already. Muted again.
I think I'll talk a little bit about speaking now.
Yeah.
Obviously, mentorship sometimes doesn't come from one-on-one or small. Sometimes it could be on a large scale. Sometimes even through your social media platforms, things that you post. I feel like those are also methods or means through which we can mentor people, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to speaking publicly, what would you say draws you to that? And what I think my other question is, how do you relate maybe feedback, maybe people's reactions, people's experience, and how do you translate that into maybe your new workflows, maybe a new perspective, maybe, a new way of doing things? So how do you think that speaking has maybe impacted you along your journey as well?
Okay, so with speaking, it's very interesting because early in my career, speaking is also born out of my desire to teach as much as I can, generally, because that's also one way that I I gain deep understanding about any topic, literally. So if I'm trying to deep dive into any topic, my goal is to be able to write an article about it, or to give a conference talk, or to record like a video teaching that topic, because that's how I solidify learning personally. So speaking is also born out of that. But it's also interesting that early in my career, I always felt like I didn't know enough to teach, or I didn't know enough to speak, right? So it's more like, oh, this thing I know is too basic. It's too simplistic, right? And if I go to speak about it, it's just going to bore the audience, because I mean, they're looking out to learn more complex things. They're looking out to hear more complex things. But it was after a period of time where something I felt I knew how to do, that I felt was very basic. My design director at the time, who is like a mentor, because when I look at his career, I'm like, oh, if I follow this trajectory, I'm good. I'm literally good. We're in a conversation one period, and he was like, oh, I'm having this challenge about how to do this. I've tried this. Now I'm looking for how to translate this data or these responses into into data or framework that I can draw insights from. And I just thought for a minute, and I remembered a UX exercise I learned in my bootcamp days. And I was like, oh, you can take the responses and like create an affinity map out of it and create patterns out of it. And he paused for a second. He was like, oh, that actually works. That would actually work. And he went on with that, and it entirely solved a problem he has probably been grappling with for like a week or two, right? And later on, when we're speaking that week, I shared that perspective with him about like how, and those were early in my apprentice days, like how I feel like some of those knowledge are not valuable. So it's just because we've built a lot of like comfort level with him. That was why I was able to share that. But if I was probably asked that in a group, or if somebody asked that question in a larger group, I probably would not have shared that, because I think, oh, that's too easy. Like that would not be the solution to that problem. So it was in sharing that he advised me and opened my eyes to see that there are people at different levels of their journey, right? So some things I've learned may be useful to a junior, or some things I've learned that I feel are not very useful to seniors or to like people at his level, may be useful to somebody who's just starting their career, or somebody who's like midway into their career. And that's one of the first things that opened me up to speaking and just generally sharing my knowledge around concepts. And when I started speaking, for every time I've sort of like stood on a conference stage to share about a topic, I get a lot of testimonials. Sometimes during the question and answer sessions, sometimes just after I'm down from the stage and I'm just sort of like walking around or during lunch break or something. In most cases, some of those testimonials flood my LinkedIn and Twitter DMs. In some other cases, it comes a week or 2 or 3 later with people who have taken my advice and have applied it in their day-to-day job. What comes to mind is the last conference I spoke at, I spoke on the topic, before you build your MVP, and the topic was tailored to founders, to developers who are building, to designers who are building. And I could literally see the energy for a lot of people, because I touched on a lot of things that they were grappling with at that time. I could literally see the energy in some of the feedback and in some of the testimonials I got about how it has answered their question. For some other people, like I think it was during the lunch break and during the breakout session, I literally had a good number of people sort of like taking turns and sort of like queuing up to speak to me about their products, right? And about how to apply some of the things I shared with them to their products, just sharing where their product is Some of them is more like, oh, we've not done these things that you mentioned, and we are at this level. How do we backtrack to make sure we are on the right track? And those were some of the conversations. And even in those conversations, I was still learning like some more practically with people who are building in the field. And I'm thinking, okay, how do I refine this very talk to be able to capture the experiences of founders that at this point in their building journey and this point in their building journey. And yeah, so generally that has helped me to adapt even that talk and made me sort of like see the need to deliver that talk again to another different audience. So like literally that's how I am able to sort of like take feedback and improve some of the things I talk with, or allow it to sort of like influence what I speak about the next time I'm invited to speak at a conference.
Very, yeah. So I think I'm going to squeeze these two questions into, because they're kind of tightly related. And one is, obviously the outlook that you had in the beginning is probably not the outlook you have now. Obviously we all have like foundational beliefs and whatever that help us grow. So what are some things that, or something that you thought was particular about design in the beginning of your journey that you know now, and it's maybe not so applicable to you, or maybe has evolved a little bit? And then when it comes to reflection, what do you want people to say about you, let's say years from 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What do you want people to say when they reflect on your journey and your experience as you have grown in your expertise?
Okay, so let me start with the first question. One of the things that, one of the beliefs I've held, or rather, one of the philosophies I came into the industry with that has evolved over time is I was such a perfectionist. My wife still believes I am, but I think I've grown a little bit in that regard. I was such a perfectionist, but over time, I've come to realize small progress is always better than perfection, because sometimes perfection leads to procrastination. There are a lot of things I've tried to do in the past that didn't launch, that didn't ship. There are a lot of, even with it took me a long time to even start my mentorship program, because I was thinking about it in such a grand, with such a grand vision and in such a grand shape. And I realized that sort of like it sort of like paralyzed me a little bit from starting. So one of the things I've evolved from sort of like chasing perfection early is to always chase continuous progress instead of perfection, to start small, to ship early, to generally learn and adapt on the journey. Because interestingly, that is how my career as a designer has evolved. Literally, I started putting myself out there. The first design I posted on Twitter was super crappy. A few weeks ago, I went back to that design and I'm like, goodness, I'm like, did I work on this? And my first thought is, how did anybody give me a job then? But I have sort of like improved. And one of the things design has taught me is, no matter how amazing I feel my work is today, if I come back to it 3 weeks from today, I'm going to see 1,001 places to improve it. So that has made me to even literally stop chasing perfection and just try to like chase continuous progress. And the second question, 5-10 years from now, what I want people to be able to say about my work and about me generally is number one, which is the core philosophy for being a designer generally, is that I design experiences. that empowered them to do or like to do what they want to do, like, or rather I designed experiences that empowered them to do their best work. That's for people that are sort of like working with me. And I also designed experiences that solved really critical problems for them and allowed them to sort of like have a good time, or have like a great time while trying to solve their problems. And those are for the people that are using the products I've designed or are at the end product of the services that the companies I'm building offer. Those are for the kids that come into our maker space, or for the founders that come into Startup Lab to partner with us to sort of like build their products.
Wow. Thank you very much, Mr. Moses Amama. It's been very insightful and also very actually fun talking and hearing and learning from you. I think how I want to wrap it up is you can just, if you have anything that you want to say, any closing remarks, and then also you can let us know where we can look you up on social media, and then maybe some of the mentorship programs or groups that you run, and also some of the products that you have influenced, so that people can go and get a feel of your creativity as well. Majorly,
I enjoy having conversations about designs. I enjoy having conversations about like design systems. I enjoy having conversations about startups and about like learning experiences. So you can, if you want to talk about any of those or anything else, you can reach out to me on Twitter and LinkedIn. My handle on Twitter is Mo_Amama. On LinkedIn, it's just Moses Amama. On Instagram, it's Mo_Amama. On Facebook, also Mo_Amama. I'm also on ADP list. So you can, if you want to have a conversation about your design career or any design related thing, you can find me on ADP list also. For my mentorship sessions, we typically put out announcements from time to time on any of my socials, so you can find us there. If you're interested in any of the work we do with FutureFeat, you can check us out on FutureFeat.com generally. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you. I guess in terms of products, there are so many I can mention. Those are the ones that are not NDA backed, but the ones that come to mind majorly is for FutureFeat, we're launching a maker kit that sort of like that parents can buy and have access to our manuals and be able to give their children an opportunity to assess some of the learnings that we offer in our space physically in their homes.
Wow.
So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moses Amama. For those of you who have actually stuck with us throughout this episode, we appreciate you. We hope that you have learned a thing or two. We encourage you to, like I said from the beginning, like, comment, subscribe, share our content, and also try and engage with Moses Amama and the speakers that we bring on here. It is always a privilege to get a peek into the minds and to understand the journeys, workflows, processes that professionals like Moses have gone to get to the level that they are, and also kind of gives you a hint into the future and what to expect. So it has been a very, very exciting episode today. Thank you so much, Mr. Moses, and we look forward to interacting with you and also following your journey and then participating and using some of the innovations that you have influenced as well. So yeah, take care, and we hope to see you at even the highest levels. And we pray that God even keeps pushing you, even giving you more knowledge, more wisdom, more resources. Amen.
Amen. All righty. Thank you.
Thank you very much.